Behold, the Aero Mod Set, which is focused on aim gliding, a rather specific thing to have a set of mods for. We have Aero Vantage, which prevents you from being affected by gravity while aim gliding, and goes on Warframes, notably this one is an Exilus mod. Then there's Aero Agility. This one gives you a large reload speed bonus while aim gliding, but it only goes on snipers, we'll come back to that. And then Aero Periphery, which reduces how much zoom you'll have while aim gliding, so functionally you'll have a larger field of view, and it can go on any primary. The Aero Set effect is a weird form of crowd control. If you damage enemies while aim gliding, up to 5 of them, the first 5 you damaged, will fall asleep when you touch the ground. You get 3 seconds of sleep for each mod in the set, and note that like most set mods, having multiple mods in the set doesn't do anything special. Each mod just does what it says on it. The set effect, quote unquote, just refers to something that is on all 3 mods. There's no additional bonus for having multiple of the set. You just get the same effect again. This is a pretty standard stun effect. Enemies put to sleep by it don't seem to be open to finishers though, unlike other effects that are referred to as sleep. So that's usually a good thing because it means you can cleave, that is hit multiple enemies with one melee attack, or finish combos and get forced procs in there. But of course it can also be a drawback, covert lethality synergies and whatnot. And again, since you get 3 seconds of this sleep for each mod in the set, really you don't need much more than 3 or 6 seconds of stun if it's only going to be a small group of enemies. Warframe is a fast-paced game. So, a quick summary of these 3 mods before I elaborate on them. Aero Vantage is an Exilus mod that gives you crowd control, however janky that crowd control is, which is noteworthy in and of itself. Aero Agility is a lot of reload speed, but aim gliding with a sniper rifle can be pretty awkward due to the zoom, especially if you're going to both shoot and reload up there. And Aero Periphery is very weak. It has basically no effect in most situations, but it does allow you to get or increase that Aero Set effect sleep on any primary, so it's at least versatile if the Aero effect can be said to be any good. So let's start by talking about that. On the surface, I think the Aero effect is kind of strange because you have to shoot the enemies to sleep them, but shooting them tends to, kill them. It was hard for me to test this effect in a mission while using decent weapons, because enemies just don't survive damage all that frequently in most of our content. On top of that, Aero Agility goes on snipers specifically, so yeah, I don't see myself frequently shooting a sniper rifle at an enemy while aim gliding and having that enemy survive. Where the Aero effect gets better is with Warframe powers, which can activate it and often do much more nominal damage. Many Warframe powers just do incidental damage as part of their main effect, although plenty of those are already crowd control or can't be cast in the air. A good example of all those problems is Rhino Stomp. Having said that though, some Warframe powers work very well with the Aero effect. The one I'll suggest is Wisp's Shock Mode. It automatically zaps enemies for inconsequential but non-zero damage while you're aim gliding around, and then those enemies will fall asleep when you touch down. This basically gives Shock Mode a much longer stun, and that's automatic significant crowd control, so in that situation it's awesome and I highly recommend it. Because those use cases exist, I think it's worth considering where you can squeeze an Aero mod in just to get the Aero effect on certain frames, because overall, many of these mod effects are rather underwhelming aside from the Aero effect. Starting with Aero Vantage again, that's why I think it matters that this is an Exilus mod. You can just get the Aero effect for very little opportunity cost. The opportunity cost, that is the potential things you could get out of that Exilus slot, are just not very high at the moment. Many builds have very little opportunity cost lost by not having the Exilus slot, so being able to get that Aero effect in that very low value mod slot is valuable. And the anti-gravity effect is fine, it can be useful. Note that it only makes you immune to gravity. If you jump down and then aim glide, you will still go down because you have downward momentum. You're also affected by gravity, but you have downward momentum. I think the anti-gravity effect is most helpful when you're using explosive weapons and you want to avoid being on the ground so that the splash damage or even bomblets, I'm looking at you, Colstar, don't kill you. So it can be useful to have that anti-gravity effect, but I think for the most part, you're going to want to shove in Aero Vantage when you have a good Warframe power synergy with the Aero effect. Moving on to Aero Agility, reload speed isn't reload time. This just makes you reload twice as fast. It doesn't eliminate reload time altogether, but it's still noteworthy because the reload speed mods for primary weapons are very, very weak. Fast Hands especially is just not even, I don't know if I would ever run fast hands, and prime fast hands is still pretty paltry, especially compared to prime quick draw, which is the variant for secondaries, where you can effectively get this much reload speed on any secondary, and a lot of them, do want it. So I don't know, there are lots of sniper rifles that want the reload speed, and this is a lot more of it than you could otherwise get, so that is theoretically noteworthy. Again, I think the arrow set is awkward here because I don't see what situation is going to have me damaging but not killing multiple enemies while using a sniper rifle, and then I'm also going to want to reload while airborne, all in one stroke. But again, it's still a lot of reload speed. The weirdest thing to me is that the arrow effect gives you time to reload by stalling. So if you're doing, let's say, that wisp thing, if you aim glide and you're shooting things, the wisp's shock mode effect will go off, and then enemies will fall asleep when you hit the ground from the arrow effect. So you don't need reload speed because the enemies are asleep. You can just reload at your leisure. So in a way, this mod makes itself less necessary, which is a little odd, as you already have the arrow effect. It's still not a bad thing, I guess. It just means that a would-be strength of this mod is kind of made redundant. That's all. Finally, Aero Periphery, which I have the most to say about, even though, again, I think it's pretty bad. Negative zoom just is not competitive as a mod effect, no matter how much you get. So I'm going to talk about this one purely as a way to put the arrow effect in your loadout on any primary, but I want to quickly note something that I often hear, which is the suggestion that weapons get an Exilus slot, that they get a utility mod slot, quote unquote. The reason I think that's a bad idea is that there are very few things that are useful in any capacity that could go in that slot. I think that a lot of the people that are suggesting this Exilus mod slot for weapons are thinking that reload speed and magazine capacity and stuff like that would go in that slot, but those things directly give you damage. They're not utility effects. They directly increase your damage over time, over a significant period of time. I think that people are just thinking, well, those effects don't increase your numbers, so they don't increase your damage, right? But they do, This is an effect that I can't see being competitive against any normal mod, so if we had a Weapon Exilus slot, I could definitely see putting this in it, but the thing is that there are very few other effects that would go in that slot. It would basically just become another mandatory mod slot. Generally, I would say that if you don't like the reload speed or magazine capacity mods we have now, those need to be made stronger so that they can compete for a mod slot. But Aero Periphery is noteworthy as part of this topic because no amount of negative zoom would ever be competitive for a mod slot on its own. Again, unless you just wanted it for fun, that's perfectly fine. But again, talking about mods creating build diversity by being competitive enough to edge out other mods. I think the solution with stats like negative zoom is to make them part of other mods, to put it on another mod that is on the weaker side. For example, I could see something like a variant of Vigilante Armaments that maybe had a little less multi-shot, but also had negative zoom, and then I would be willing to sacrifice a little damage for it, but maybe not a whole mod's worth, It's very similar to the Amalgam, some of the Amalgam mods. So, I don't know. I mean, I think this is a useful mod in that sense. So, with that mindset in our heads, a decent number of primaries that would benefit from this zoom reduction and possibly the arrow effect in some way do exist. Hunter munitions explosives in particular come to mind because you'll sleep the enemies you loaded with slash procs so they're rendered harmless when they bleed to death. With hunter munitions, with damage over time killing in general, you have this kind of weird problem where you can represent lethal damage on the enemies, but they're not actually dead. They'll die in a few seconds to the damage you loaded them up with, but they're not literally dead. So if you have, let's say, an interception and they need to be dead so you can cap the point, or they're killing you so they need to be dead so you don't die, this type of thing is good because it CCs them, doesn't permanently take care of them, but they're already effectively dead. You just need to get them out of the way until they're actually dead. So that's not bad. The problem I see with the hunter munitions thing on explosive weapons is that I think you'd almost always be better off running Aero Vantage to get that effect so that your primary weapon doesn't become significantly weaker just to get that effect for it. Usually hunter munitions builds, you really want the crit, you need multi-shot for consistency, you definitely want base damage because very little else increases hunter munitions damage directly, and then you often want status chance to add viral or cold or something along with it. So it's a pretty tight build. Where Aero Periphery might be useful would be on weapons that aren't hybrid weapons. The opportunity cost for including what is mostly a dead mod is much lower if your weapon doesn't have crit or status it could be building around. Your mod slots are just worth less if you don't have as many multipliers, because the more of the same type of mod you put on, the less of a benefit you get for each additional one. So if you have less multipliers, your mod slots are worth less. The problem there is that most weapons without crit and status are just not very good because of what we just explained. It's just math. Of course, we should also talk about the merits of running more of the set to power up that sleep duration, and by talk about that, I mean talk about how I don't think that's worth it, especially not the whole 9 seconds. 6 is plenty, and 3 seconds from one of the 3 mods is already most of the benefit. Again, Warframe is a fast-moving game, and the value of some free crowd control like this is mostly to give you a breather so you can reorient yourself or reload, or so that you can take a careful headshot or something like that. I really don't think that this is going to be locking down maps. It's not that kind of effect, you know? So I don't think that running all of this set is a great idea. Again, especially because the effects besides the Aero set on these mods are on the weekend, most of them. Again, Aero Agility is not on the weekend, but it's a little finicky. So I don't know, it's an interesting set of mods. I really do like having set mods built around these really specific things. Although, again, I do think that some of these need to be pushed a little bit more, especially Aero Periphery. I would love to see it have some offensive benefits or just like a smattering of utility. Something I could see to solve that problem where you can't just give it more negative zoom because negative zoom is not valuable in the first place. It can even be a drawback because you can't aim as precisely. You could solve that issue not by giving it combat stats, but by just giving it way more utility. So you put the mod on and it's kind of just like a value pack of a variety of utility stats. So we have another one that's you can move faster while aiming down sights. That's not useless. You could want that, but it's not good enough on its own, right? No matter not no matter how much of it you get, but you get the point. You could get a whole bunch of that stuff. Anyway, possible idea. Still an interesting set of mods. I really do think that Aero Vantage will end up on a lot of Exilis slots and have a lot of cool interactions with Warframe powers, making them stun for longer or just have more comfy setup. You're doing a combo with Warframe powers that will kill the enemies. You're setting up Reeve or something on Revenant, and you just want some time to be able to cast all this stuff. I think it's nice. You sleep the enemies for a few seconds, and you've got all the time in the world. I've been Zandy. This has been the Aero Mod Set in its entirety, and you've been tuned to the ModCast.